Hello, my name is Gabby and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, then welcome to my channel, and today's video is going to be a top 10 list of my favorite books that I read in 2023. Usually I do keep this list to my 5 stars only. That is not going to happen this year. There's just a couple of things that had to be left off this list because St. Martin's Press still has not provided a proper response regarding their employees' hateful social media behavior, regarding how they're going to protect and provide a safer environment for those affected moving forward. But yeah, those books will not be here today, but that is okay because there are other books that I am more than happy to talk about in their place. Also not included on this list is manga that's getting its own video this year, and then it's also not going to include any rereads or non-fiction books, but those were all really good this year, so I am going to quickly name them before getting into the honorable mentions. We are going to start off with the rereads. I did reread 4 books this year. They were all incredible. Unfortunately, one is, so there's that. That brings us to a top 3. And at number 3, we have Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. At number 2, we have The Deep by River Solomon, which makes my number 1 reread of 2023, King and the Dragonflies by Kacen Callender. Moving on to the non-fiction books, these are not going to be rated, but I do have 2 of them to shout out today. The first one being Genderqueer by Maya Kobe, and the second one was Except for Palestine, The Limits of Progressive Politics by Mark Lamahill and Mitchell Plitnick, which was an audiobook. And while we're on the topic of audiobooks, I also do want to give a shout out to Minor Detail by Adania Shibley. This is an audiobook that I didn't end up rating, but I still feel like it needs a place in this video somewhere, so it's here. So with that, let's go ahead and get into the honorable mentions. These are going to be ranked in order from what was furthest from making the list to what was closest to being number 10. And these are all ranked by 1, my enjoyment level, 2, quality, and 3, just how I feel looking back at them now in 2024. Something else that I do want to note is that I do tend to rank books from the same series and the same universe together when I feel like that makes sense to do that. Or even just when I feel like it in general, but that is mostly going to come into play later. But for now, my first honorable mention is going to be Bitter by Akwaeke Emezi, followed by Fake Dates and Mooncakes by Shelley, Iron Widow by Sharon J. Zhao, Mooncakes by Suzanne Walker, Get a Life Chloe Brown, and Act Your Age Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. And finally, my last honorable mention is Flip the Script by Lila Lee. And with that, let's go ahead and get into the top 10. The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chokshi follows a married couple where the wife, in exchange for her love, makes her husband promise to never pry into her past. But when they are forced to return to her childhood home, he finds that he cannot resist. This was a book that kind of surprised me. I wasn't expecting to get as invested in it as I did. I was at a reading slump at the time, and this book gave me what was a much needed break from that reading slump, and it also almost tricked me into thinking that that reading slump was over. The way the story was told and laid out made me never want to put it down because I needed to know all of its secrets and all of its twists, and this book had what I thought was an amazing mix of beauty and magic and fantasy with twisty, complex darkness and also reality. And I loved the way that the lines between all of those things were blurred. That being said, it's number 10 for a reason. As much as I love the writing style throughout a majority of the book, I thought it was a little much from time to time. I also didn't love the ending. I was fine with it because I don't know what else I would have wanted from it, but it did feel unsatisfying compared to the rest of the book. The Last Tale of the Flower Bride is a book that's filled with haunting, gothic imagery, a matching atmosphere, and also unlikable, complex characters. I think about this book a lot, and that's because it gave me a lot to think about because this book is a lot. But I was fully there for almost all of it. Against the Loveless World by Susan Abulhawa follows our main character who is locked in solitary confinement as she reflects and thinks back upon how she got there. Speaking of books, or in this case, an audiobook that I got really invested in, this is another case of that. And we follow so much of our main character's life and journey that once I finished it, it felt so weird and wrong to not be following her anymore. I just didn't know what to do with myself for a while. Her story is a heartbreaking one with so many dark and painful moments throughout throughout it. It was not an easy listen by any means. And it felt like such a raw and honest glimpse into these characters' lives and also the setting and the time period. Especially when it comes to living as a refugee, life under occupation, and how all of those things impact people and families. There were so many insights and scenes and just things that happened throughout this book that are going to stick with me for a long time. And the only reason that it's so far down on this list is because there was a spoilery part of the storyline that I do wish was handled differently, and it did take me out of it some. But for everything else, incredible. Concrete Rose by Angie Thomas takes place 17 years prior to The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas, and follows our main character Maverick after he finds out that he is going to be a father. However, his gang connections and participation complicates and impacts this. Angie Thomas just really knows how to write a good, quality YA contemporary, and this book is no exception to that, but it was what I kept thinking about while reading it. These characters really came to life on the page. They felt so real and so three-dimensional, and the character deep dive and exploration and ultimate growth of Maverick in this book has to be some of the best that I've ever read for a main character. And the fact that Concrete Rose is a prequel to The Hate U Give only made everything better, but it's also a book that really stands on its own. I flew through this story in like 2 days, which is definitely not always the easiest thing for me to do. It does not happen often. But this book made that happen, and it made it feel really easy to do so, which I'm very grateful for, and I just have so much appreciation and respect for not only this book, but also the other books that I've read from this author as a whole. This Is My America by Kim Johnson follows our main character Tracy, whose father is an innocent black man on death row. Every week she writes letters to an organization called Innocence X asking for their help, as she's beginning to run out of time, and when her brother is accused of killing a white girl, Tracy begins to investigate what really happened between them and uncovers the racist history of their Texas town and how that history still haunts the present. This book has been on my TBR since I found out about it pre-release, and this was the year that I finally read it, and this was also the year where I could finally give it the 5 stars that it deserves instead of just like talking about how I was probably going to do that. This book being a debut feels kind of wild to me because it's one of the best YA contemporaries that I've ever read. I loved its mystery novel-esque formatting, and I also really loved our main character. This book also dives into America's racist history and how it's still impacting present day, especially when it comes to the police and the criminal justice system. I will say the only thing that I didn't love about this book was the love triangle. I didn't think it was necessary, and it felt a little bit unfinished by the end of the story. That being said, I did like the romance, and I would love to just like remove the love triangle and have it just be them. I know this book is supposed to be getting an HBO Max adaptation at some point, and if done well, I'm really excited to see it. Summer of Bitter and Sweet by Jen Ferguson is a debut that follows our main character who is working at an ice cream shop with her ex-boyfriend who has only ever made her feel discomfort, and her former best friend who disappeared 3 years ago. She was hoping that her biological father would stay behind bars for the rest of his life. However, everything changes when she receives a letter from him insisting that she meets with him. And when her family business comes under threat, she realizes that she cannot avoid him forever, no matter how much she wants to. I think I'm a little bit surprised at how high this book ended up on this list, but I do have a soft spot for it in my heart that isn't going away anytime soon. The Summer of Bitter and Sweet is a book that took me a long time to read because that's just how my reading life was going at the time. I started it in the summer, which is when I would actually recommend reading this book because it does have an amazing summer atmosphere. But I didn't end up finishing this book until mid to late fall, which it was still good then. I still loved the atmosphere then, but it also made me really wish that I had actually finished it in the summer. This story is filled with a lot of terrible things, a lot of darkness, a lot of anger, and it also really knows how to settle in the pockets of time where the characters are just okay, or maybe even happy, or just working on that. On this note, this book does have a lot of trauma that the characters are impacted by, and also just like a lot of bad communication, but you follow these characters as they try to work through that and just do their best while dealing with everything else around them. I also really love the ace representation in this book and just our main character's exploration of it. I don't know, it's not a perfect book. I think the pacing probably could have been better, but it's also hard to tell because of how much that I picked this up and put it back down, but it's one that I definitely do have a love for, and that love overcame any minor complaints that I maybe had. The Dragon's Promise by Elizabeth Lim is the sequel to Six Crimson Cranes, which follows our main character Shiori, who has a secret forbidden magic. And before her betrothal ceremony, she loses control over this magic, and although she has successfully stalled the wedding that she does not want, she accidentally draws the attention of her sorceress stepmother. Six Crimson Cranes was second place on my favorites list last year, so this sequel had a lot to live up to. And it's a book that did feel different from Six Crimson Cranes, but I'm definitely not going to complain about that when I love what this book did. Even if I didn't love all of the fighting / action scenes, which is unfortunately just a thing that I seem to have with this author. And that did impact this book some, but it also had some fight scenes that overcame that. And it delivered what is probably my favorite moment out of this entire series, and that is saying something. And this book is filled with moments like that, and is filled with so much beauty and so much magic. And I love the way that this universe as a whole handles its magic and its fantasy, and it helps to create what is one of my favorite atmospheres of all time. I don't think that I've ever read anything like this book, honestly. There were so many good concepts and reveals and moments. And Shiori's character growth throughout both of these books was so lovely and wonderful. And The Dragon's Promise also got me incredibly excited for her Radiant Curse, which is a book that we'll hopefully be seeing on this list next year. Heartstopper Volume 5 is the 5th volume in the Heartstopper graphic novel series by Alice Oseman. And it follows the story of our main character Charlie, who is an openly gay high schooler who is kind of the overthinking type. And it also follows our other main character Nick, who is like a cheerful and soft-hearted rugby player. These two become friends very quickly once they meet, and Charlie is falling hard for Nick, but he just isn't sure if he has the chance. This was my last read of 2023, and it was just such an amazing way to end the year. This is one of my favorite volumes of Heartstopper, which again, is saying something. Because I love every volume of Heartstopper, but I don't know, something about this one just hit differently for me. One of the things I love most about this volume is the way they set up Nick's character growth and journey moving forward. And that's actually the case not only for him, but also for Charlie. And a lot of our characters are about to undergo some big life changes, they're growing up and are excited, but a lot of them are also worried. And once again, this volume just proved to me how long I could follow these characters for and just be perfectly happy. Because this volume really showed just how much potential and how much excitement there is ahead for these characters. Which is exciting just as someone who loves and cares about these characters and wants to see them thrive. And they do thrive in this book, and I love seeing it. And this book just made me happy. There were so many cute and so many funny moments, even though the darker storylines are still around. And there's one more volume left, which I am not ready to face, but I also cannot wait. Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Malinda Lo takes place in the 1950s in San Francisco's Chinatown, and it follows our main character who realizes that she is in love with another girl as they walk under the neon sign of a lesbian bar known as the Telegraph Club. However, due to the time period and the setting, these two girls are unfortunately just not in a safe place to fall in love with one another. We went from the final book that I read in 2023 to the first book that I read in 2023, which, what a way to start, and I also couldn't have asked for a better way to start my reading year. There were so many beautiful moments in this book, and again, a lot of dark and emotional moments as well, and that's the case for our two main characters individually, but also for them together as the romance. These two captured my entire heart. I loved them together. I loved seeing them together and being happy despite everything else around them, because they couldn't have that all of the time. I went through so many different emotions while reading this book, from the anger and the frustration, the just feeling emotional and really feeling the impact of all of those heartwarming moments that I mentioned earlier. This book also had some interesting characters, but I will say if you were a background character, of which there were quite a few, you were probably pretty in the background, and some of those characters unfortunately did feel flat to me, which feels weird to say because like the opposite is true for everything else. You can really tell and feel just how much time, love, and research went into this story and into these characters, and I just loved every single second of it. Our Violent Ends by Chloe Gong and also Fally the Fortune by Chloe Gong are both sequels to These Violent Delights. These Violent Delights is a Romeo and Juliet retelling that is set in 1920 Shanghai. There are rival gangs and a monster. And our main character Juliet has to team up with her first love and also her first betrayal, and together they have to set aside their guns and their grudges in order to stop all of the mayhem. Fally the Fortune takes place after the events of Our Violent Ends and is set in 1930 Shanghai. The rest of the synopsis gets a little too spoilery, so we'll leave it at that. I will say I almost didn't rank these two together, but I do think that it's just easier to talk about them this way because Fally the Fortune is so connected to Our Violent Ends. But despite how much they overlap, they do feel like very different series. This universe is just one of my favorites ever. It gives me the same excitement and same investment levels that I had when I first started reading and found a series that I really loved, which is something that I am very, very grateful for because it's unfortunately just not something that happens too often anymore. And these two books just really leaned into who they are from the time periods to the Romeo and Juliet of it all in the case for Our Violent Ends. And I loved how Our Violent Ends had their 1920s mystery gangster atmosphere, but Fally the Fortune leans into the 1930s spy and assassin atmosphere. And it really helps you feel the passing of time in between these two stories and even made me feel nostalgic for the 1920s setting once we no longer had it. And that's also the case with the characters. I love this original cast so much, but the newer cast in Fally the Fortune felt just as interesting and just as entertaining. And these characters all around just have so much chemistry with one another. They all have their own roles, and this is a universe with a lot of moving parts, which makes everything about it feel so much fun and also immersive because nothing feels flat. I cannot wait to read the rest of this universe probably at some point in 2024 because there's no way that I could stay away from it for that long. And Our Violent Ends and Fally the Fortune were extremely close to being number one on this list. And I did go back and forth for a while before making that final decision, and I actually used the book that we're not talking about today because at the end of the day, I would have put that book above Our Violent Ends and Fally the Fortune, but I wouldn't have put it above this. She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan is an adult fantasy and the first book in the Radiant Emperor duology, and it is a reimagining of the Emperor of the Ming Dynasty's rise to power. I mean, let's face it, I was looking for an excuse to put this book here anyway, I might as well do it. If you don't know, I did plan to read the sequel of this book towards the end of the year in hopes that I could just like combine those two and rank them together in this number one spot to make my decision easier. It was a strategy that didn't happen and ended up not being needed anyway, but I do still plan on reading that book soon. And I'm honestly shocked that I've managed to hold off on that sequel for as long as I have because I need to know where everything in the story is going to go. I was completely immersed in this book from the first page, and that's thanks to the writing style. There was just such amazing, vivid imagery throughout this entire book, especially when it comes to the settings, and once I settled into it, I never left until I had to because it was over. It was filled with so many compelling and interesting characters and strategies, and I was just really blown away by the character growth and development for our more main characters. They all have their own motivations and drives, which helps to make the relationships in this book and every interaction just incredibly interesting, especially with all the politics and war strategy going on. She Who Became the Sun also has a lot of commentary about fate and desire that I really loved, especially when it tied into the character growth that I mentioned earlier. And like the rest of my top 3 actually, this book also has a lot of LGBTQ+ themes and characters in an historical setting, and covers the harshness that comes with that, but again, this story does have its moments of beauty as well, and there's a romance that I thought had some really amazing moments throughout this book. She Who Became the Sun is a book that just really took over my brain while I was reading it, and everything about it and everyone in it helped contribute to that, including the pacing and all the cool fantasy elements that this book utilizes. It's my favorite book of 2023, and I don't know if I fully expected it to be that when I hauled it. And I do just want to thank everyone who shared this book during the Trans Rights Readathon because it definitely helped me get to this book a lot faster than I would have otherwise. And I am so grateful for that, and I am so excited to continue reading this story with the sequel. Okay, so that is all that I have for today's video. Thank you all so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, and answer the question that'll be around here if you want to do that, and hopefully I will see you here next time. Bye!